"Don't touch him," Rose said sharply, her voice slicing through the warm spring air like broken glass. She hadn't meant to sound so cold. But the boy Black, scruffy, maybe 8, had reached for Lucas's hand, and instinct had fired before reason. She regretted it the second the words escaped. The boy froze mid-step, a red toy truck dangling from his fingers. His eyes flicked to Lucas, then to his father, who was already walking toward them with a calm, steady gait. Andre Johnson raised a hand in peace. "It's all right," he said evenly, voice like warm gravel. "Mason's just trying to make a friend. He doesn't always ask first." Rose opened her mouth, then closed it, her cheeks flushed with heat. "I'm sorry. That was unnecessary." "It happens," Andre said simply, then looked down at his son. "What do we do when someone's not ready, Mason?" The boy lowered his head slightly. "We give them space." Lucas stood silent as stone, one foot slightly behind the other, hoodie sleeves pulled tight over his hands. He hadn't said a word in 2 years, not since the accident. Not since his father died, and he stopped making sense of the world. This park graffiti-tagged, grass-patchy, broken swing swaying was the last place Rose had imagined any progress. But she was here, desperate enough to try what no professional had suggested. A real environment, real people, no scripts, no sterile toys. Mason didn't step away. Instead, he knelt, placed the toy truck on the ground between them. "I bet yours goes faster." Lucas blinked. His gaze dropped to the truck, then to the boy's face. No one said anything. Andre folded his arms and stepped back. Rose held her breath. Lucas reached out. Not to the boy, not to Rose. To the truck. He pushed it. Slowly. Then again, a little faster. Mason grinned. "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." The truck bumped over the sidewalk crack. Mason grabbed his own and gave chase. "You want to race him?" he asked, eyes bright. Lucas's mouth opened, closed, then, "I want to." 2 words. Quiet, strained, but there. Rose's knees buckled. She lowered herself onto the nearest bench, her heart stammering in her chest like a warning siren. She turned to Andre, voice shaking. "Did you hear that?" Andre nodded once, loud and clear. "That's the first thing he said in over 2 years. Andre didn't blink. "Then I'm honored." And the boys were already crouched at the edge of the pavement, lining up their trucks. Mason counted 3, 2, 1, go, and they released them like champions. Lucas grinned, no, smiled, a soft curve of the lips that Rose hadn't seen since before the funeral. She felt tears climb up her throat and clench there, waiting. "I'm Rose," she said, holding out a hand. "Andre." He took it firmly, respectfully. "I owe you." He shook his head. "You owe your son. He showed up today." End from. They sat in silence for a moment, watching. The playground was louder now, children shouting, someone crying in the distance, the occasional whoop from a basketball court nearby, but somehow, around them, there was peace, a stillness within the noise. Rose's mind swirled. She'd tried everything. Thousands on speech therapists, behavioral specialists flown in from Boston, treatments involving sand trays and dolphin-assisted sessions. Nothing had cracked him open, but here, on cracked pavement next to a man in hand-me-down sneakers and a boy with no inhibition, Lucas had spoken. "I read that peer connection can sometimes—" Andre raised a hand. "I didn't read anything. I just know Mason. He sees who people are." Rose's breath caught. "Do you do this? Professionally?" Andre snorted. "Not anymore. I used to run group therapy for kids in trauma. Budget cuts, politics. These days I paint houses, fix cars, pick up gigs where I can." She stared. "You should be doing more." Andre's smile was polite, but edged. "Been told that before." Lucas was now on the monkey bars. He wasn't swinging, just gripping the first rung, looking at Mason. Mason climbed up and waited. Then both boys crossed slowly, hands wrapped around rusted metal like adventurers over a canyon. Rose exhaled slowly. This could be something." Andre said nothing. "I'm not suggesting therapy," she added quickly, "but if you were open to spending time with him." Andre's posture stiffened. "With respect, ma'am, I don't do private care, especially not for billionaires trying to fix things with playdates." Rose blinked, stung. "That's not fair." Andre's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe not, but it's honest. They watched in silence. Lucas dropped from the final bar, feet thudding onto the rubber mat, a small smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "He hasn't smiled in years," Rose whispered. "Understood. Then maybe today was good enough." He turned to go. Mason hesitated, then waved at Lucas. "See you next time, buddy." Lucas didn't speak again, but he raised his hand awkward, unsure, and waved back. Rose sat alone for several minutes after they left. The sunlight had shifted. The shadows stretched longer. She finally stood, brushing the back of her coat and calling softly, "Come on, sweetheart." Lucas walked beside her, quiet, still, but not empty. When they reached the car, Rose opened the back door. As Lucas slid in, she crouched and asked gently, "Did you like playing with Mason?" He nodded. One motion. "Would you like to see him again?" This time, he looked her in the eye. "Yes." As she pulled out of the parking lot, Rose didn't feel triumphant. She felt terrified. Something had shifted, and with it, a door she'd almost given up on had opened. And the key had come from the most unexpected hand. "I want to see him again," Lucas said the next morning, his voice barely above a whisper as he stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Rose froze mid-pour, coffee spilling slightly onto the marble counter. Her hands trembled, but she didn't drop the carafe. She turned slowly, blinking as if afraid the boy might vanish like a dream. "Andre's son? Mason?" Lucas nodded once, eyes steady. It was the first time he'd spoken 2 days in a row in over 24 months. A string of breath caught in her chest before she forced herself to nod casually, not wanting to overwhelm the fragile miracle that had begun. "We'll see what we can do, sweetheart." Later that day, Rose sat alone in the driver's seat of her parked car, engine off, outside the same public playground with its worn benches and chipped murals. Lucas was at school, an elite private academy with therapy aides and a strict IEP, but her mind was here, drawn back by the echo of 2 soft words and the face of the man who'd stood calmly beside her, as if he were built from something steadier than the world allowed. She hadn't come to talk. She'd come to observe, to understand, and maybe to feel less powerless. From the corner of her window, she spotted him. Andre was crouched beside a broken chain on the swing set, toolbox open at his feet. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms dusted with dirt and effort. He worked in silence. No music, no phone, just presence. Rose hesitated, then opened the door and stepped out, heels clicking softly against the pavement. This time, she wore sneakers. Andre looked up but didn't stand. "You checking on the swings or on me?" She offered a small smile. "Depends on which one needs more fixing." He smirked, barely. "Swings are simpler. Gravity does most of the work. I wasn't sure you'd be here." "I'm here every Wednesday. Mason's with his aunt this afternoon." He stood now, wiping his hands on a rag. "No trucks to race today." Rose stepped closer. "Yesterday meant more to me than I can explain." "I believe you," he said evenly, but his eyes held a cautious distance. "I don't want to make this awkward," she added quickly, "but I was wondering if you'd consider meeting Lucas again, not as a job, just as a connection." Andre crossed his arms. "I don't do charity for rich people looking to heal guilt." Her stomach clenched. "This isn't about guilt." "You sure?" he asked, "because it feels a lot like someone trying to turn a moment into a program." She inhaled slowly, reminded herself she wasn't in a boardroom. "Andre, I'm not offering you a position. I'm offering you lunch." He raised an eyebrow. "To talk," she clarified. His expression softened a degree. "All right, lunch then, neutral ground. There's a place 2 blocks away, deli on Crenshaw." He chuckled. "You sure you won't melt?" "I came in sneakers. That's progress." They walked side by side in silence, her blazer fluttering slightly in the breeze, his boots tapping the concrete in an even rhythm. The deli was a narrow place with cracked vinyl booths and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in a decade. The woman behind the counter greeted Andre by name. Rose watched him order with ease pastrami on rye, extra pickles. She followed suit, uncertain but willing. They sat in the booth near the window. Andre took a sip of water and leaned back. "So?" She took a breath. Lucas didn't just talk. He smiled, he waved, he connected. That hasn't happened in years. "And that's beautiful," Andre said gently. "But that was between the boys. Mason and Lucas found each other." "And you," she pressed. "Your presence, your way of speaking to him, it mattered." He hesitated. "Lady, I've spent most of my life watching people underestimate kids, especially black kids, especially poor ones. I talk to all of them like they matter, because they do." She looked down. "I don't want to pretend I understand what you or Mason go through. I don't. But I do know what it's like to feel helpless." Andre leaned forward. "You're not helpless. You're powerful. The question is how you use it." She met his eyes. "I want to use it to help, not just Lucas. Other kids like him, like Mason. Maybe it starts with something small, a community space, story circles, mixed play sessions." He studied her for a long moment. "You know how many people come to these neighborhoods with big ideas and walk away the second it doesn't make a headline? I'm not them." "No, you're not," he agreed. "You're showing up. That's worth something." They ate in relative quiet, the air thick with the weight of tentative possibility. When they stood, Rose reached into her bag, pulled out a business card, and handed it to him. "This isn't an offer, it's an invitation. Come to Lucas's school sometime. See what they're doing right and wrong." He looked at the card but didn't take it. "You don't need to decide now," she added. "I'll think about it," he said at last, slipping it into his pocket. As they stepped outside, the afternoon sun had warmed. A group of teens passed on skateboards, one of them calling out to Andre. He waved, smiled, then turned back to Rose. "Lucas is a good kid," he said. "I know. Oh, he's lucky you haven't given up." "I gave up on being perfect," she said quietly. "That helped." Andre chuckled. "Keep showing up. That's the real therapy." He walked back toward the playground, and she stood watching for a long moment before heading to her car. That evening, at dinner, Lucas spoke again. One sentence. "Can Mason come over sometime?" Rose smiled through a sudden sting in her eyes. "We'll make that happen, sweetheart." Something real was beginning. Not therapy, not a miracle, but a fragile bridge, built from moments and trust. And somewhere between the cracked sidewalk and a deli sandwich, Rose realized healing didn't always come from experts. Sometimes it walked up in old boots and held out a truck. If this story moved you, if you believe in the quiet strength of kindness and integrity, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. And if you've ever witnessed or experienced something similar, share it in the comments, because your voice might be the light someone else is searching for. "He's not like the others," Lucas whispered one evening, his voice fragile but sure. Rose looked up from the stack of documents on the kitchen counter. The words pulled her fully into the moment. She set down her pen and walked over to where Lucas was sitting, curled in the corner of the couch, blanket around his legs, his sketchpad open on his lap. "Who, sweetheart?" she asked gently, even though she already knew. "Mason," he said, as if the name itself was a kind of answer. Rose sat beside him, careful not to disrupt the invisible cocoon he always seemed to build around himself when he spoke. "What makes him different?" Lucas thought for a moment, then shrugged. "He doesn't wait for me to talk. He just lets me be there." Those few words felt heavier than entire sessions with therapists who had tried coaxing, bribing, even tricking words out of him. "That's called friendship," Rose whispered. "The real kind." Lucas nodded slowly, then returned to his drawing, a rough but charming image of two boys sitting on the monkey bars, trucks parked nearby like loyal sentries. Rose reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. Her heart swelled not from pride, but from hope. The next morning, Rose drove into South Central alone. The gated community she lived in still felt like a world away. She had dressed down jeans, sneakers, a sweatshirt with a faded college logo. No one noticed her, which was exactly the point. She parked near a small rec center where Andre had said he volunteered on Fridays. The building wasn't much worn brick, peeling paint, but there was life in it. Through the open doors, she saw kids running drills on a makeshift basketball court, laughter spilling out like sunlight. Andre stood near the edge of the court, clipboard in hand, gently correcting a teenager's footwork. He spotted her immediately. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said as he approached, wiping sweat from his brow with a towel slung over his shoulder. "I wanted to understand where you come from," Rose said simply. "You mean besides the side of town that doesn't make it onto the charity galas?" he replied with a wry grin. She didn't flinch. "Yes, that too." He studied her for a beat. Then, without ceremony, handed her a bottle of water. "Come on, I'll show you around." They moved through the small space-together classrooms with broken whiteboards, a pantry stocked with canned goods, a reading room with threadbare beanbags and shelves of donated books. Everything here is built on favors, Andre explained. Time, labor, materials. People give what they can. No one gets paid. And yet it works, Rose said. Barely, he corrected. But yeah, because people care. After the tour, they sat on the concrete steps outside. The sun was beginning to dip, throwing golden light across the parking lot. I'm thinking of starting something, Rose said, surprising even herself. Something real, a foundation. But it can't just be for show. Andre raised an eyebrow. You're serious? As a heart attack, you'll get resistance. From your people and mine. Then we'll be doing something right, she said, eyes steady. He let out a slow whistle. You're really not what I expected. Neither are you. The following week, Andre and Mason came over for dinner. It was casual spaghetti, garlic bread, juice boxes. The boys played quietly in the living room, their laughter drifting in like music through the walls. Rose set the dishes down, then poured Andre a glass of wine. You know, he said, swirling the glass, I've eaten in a lot of places. Churches, soup kitchens, cafeterias, but this is the first time I've had dinner in a house like this. How does it feel? She asked, genuinely. Strange, he admitted, but not bad. Maybe that's a start. Later, as they cleared the table, Rose glanced at him. Do you ever think about what it would look like if more kids like Mason and Lucas had spaces to just be together? No labels, no therapy, just real connection. Andre leaned against the counter. All the time. Then let's build that. It's not just about funding, he warned. It's about trust, about being present. Then I'm in, she said. Fully. Andre looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Not agreement, not yet, but willingness. And in that space, something unspoken solidified. That night, after they left, Lucas approached her quietly. Can we do this again? She crouched to his level, brushing his hair back gently. Absolutely. He listens to you, Lucas said. Mr. Andre, even when you don't talk much, Rose felt her throat tighten. He listens because he respects people, all kinds of people. Lucas smiled. I think I like that. Rose stayed up late, sketching plans on her tablet. Ideas flowed easily now after school programs, transportation for underserved kids, mentorships. But beyond logistics, it was the mission that pulsed through her. Create spaces where kids didn't have to perform to be accepted, where healing didn't come from diagnoses but from community, from dignity, from friendship. And at the center of it all, two boys, a truck, and a truth as old as time. Sometimes, it's the smallest voices that speak the loudest. You don't have to come, Rose said into the phone, her voice quiet but laced with something unmovable. But I think you should be there. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Andre's voice, low and cautious. You're really going to sit in front of those people and tell them you want to fund a program for kids like mine? Yes, she replied. And I want you sitting beside me when I do. Another pause, deeper this time. All right, I'll be there. That was all she needed. The next morning, the boardroom at Whitman Enterprises gleamed with steel and glass. Long windows looked out over Los Angeles, the city wrapped in haze and motion. Inside, the conference table was surrounded by polished men and women, attorneys, investors, division heads, all white, all wealthy. Rose stood at the head of the table, her hands resting on a printed proposal. Dressed simply in a navy blouse and gray slacks, she looked more like a social worker than a CEO. Andre sat silently 2 seats to her right, his jacket folded neatly in his lap, eyes steady but unreadable. At her left was Lucas's lead therapist, and in front of them all sat rows of charts, case studies, and projections. I appreciate you all making time, Rose began, her voice clear, composed. I know this isn't the usual line item. There were some tight nods, a few sidelong glances. I'm proposing a partnership between Whitman and several underfunded community centers, starting with the one in South Central. A quiet shuffle of papers. You're talking about a charity initiative? One of the older men asked. No, Rose replied. I'm talking about infrastructure, support, real access. We create spaces where children of all backgrounds, especially neurodivergent children, can interact without labels or expectation. Play, learn, be, together, freely. One, and the ROI? Someone else asked. Is this tax-deductible goodwill or something deeper? Rose leaned forward slightly. It's legacy, it's responsibility, and it's personal. Then she told them the story. Lucas's silence, his trauma, his breakthrough moment at a worn-out public park with a boy whose father wasn't rich or credentialed, but who showed up, who spoke to Lucas like a human being. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise in dramatics. It was steady. Conviction threaded through every syllable. She didn't perform. She simply told the truth. When she finished, the room was quiet. Andre looked at her, then at the room. I'm not a businessman, he said slowly, but I am a father. I've seen what happens when systems ignore kids who don't fit the mold. What Rose is talking about, it's not theory, it's survival. His words hung in the air. One board member leaned back, skeptical. And you expect us to just open our checkbooks for this experiment? Rose answered. Number, I expect you to understand this isn't an experiment. It's the future, and we can be a part of shaping it or continue pretending our walls are high enough to keep out the fallout. After the meeting, the room slowly emptied, leaving only Andre and Rose. She exhaled deeply, a tightness in her shoulders beginning to loosen. Well? She asked. Andre gave a small nod. You didn't flinch. I wanted to, but you didn't. You think it'll work? He shrugged. Some will fight it, some will ignore it, but some will believe it, and that's all we need to start. Later that week, Rose took Lucas to the community center. She wanted him to see it through her eyes, but more importantly, to experience it without the weight of being the quiet boy. Mason was already there, playing chess with a teenager in a wheelchair. The room buzzed not with structure, but with joy. Imperfect, vibrant, real. Lucas hovered at the edge, uncertain, but then Mason saw him and waved. No pressure, just welcome. Lucas moved forward. Within minutes, they were drawing on a shared whiteboard, laughter bubbling in small bursts. Rose stood beside Andre, watching. This is what I want to protect, she said. Then we keep building, Andre replied. Over the next few weeks, the foundation took shape. Rose used her connections carefully, not as leverage, but as bridges. She invited skeptical donors to visit the rec center to see what real change looked like. Slowly, trust grew, not easily, but steadily. Mason and Lucas became the center's unofficial ambassadors, their bond something even the most hardened skeptics couldn't dismiss. One afternoon, Rose found herself painting a mural on one of the center's outer walls. She wore overalls and old sneakers, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Andre painted beside her, a quiet rhythm between them. Never thought I'd see you do manual labor, he teased. Never thought I'd enjoy it, she shot back. He grinned. You're different now. No, she said, dipping her brush again. I'm just more myself than I've ever been. That night, as Lucas and Mason played cards under the warm kitchen light, Rose realized something profound. The work they were doing, it wasn't about programs or structures. It was about shifting the center of gravity, about recognizing that justice and joy could exist in the same breath, about dismantling the belief that only some children were worth investment. And as she watched the two boys, one white, one black, one rich, one struggling laugh over a game of Go Fish, she knew in her bones. The future wasn't something to wait for. It was already happening. In moments, in meals, in murals, in the spaces between words, where healing quietly took root. Your son's doing incredible, the speech therapist said, tapping her notes with the back of her pen as Rose sat across from her in the small, sunlit office at the center. Lucas has started initiating nonverbal cues, consistent eye contact, even vocalizing when he's excited. That's a huge step. Rose gave a tired but grateful smile, the kind that came not from sleep, but from a kind of soul, deep relief. It's all Mason, she said quietly. He doesn't treat Lucas like a project. He treats him like a brother. The therapist nodded. There's no replacement for connection. Real, consistent connection. Later that afternoon, Rose stepped into the newly converted multi-purpose room, formerly an old storage area, now painted in bright, welcoming colors with mats, bookshelves, and oversized beanbags. Mason and Lucas were building what looked like a cardboard spaceship with two other kids. Andre was crouched beside them, duct tape in hand, pretending to be a mission commander giving orders. 10 minutes to launch, he boomed. The kids giggled, Mason saluting dramatically, Lucas smiling wide. Rose leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes soft. She hadn't expected this 6 months ago, not the program, not the sense of belonging, and definitely not the way her life was gradually being rewritten by love that asked for nothing but presence. That night, over a casual dinner of takeout Chinese, Andre sat across from her at the kitchen table. Lucas and Mason were upstairs, reading comics. The house had become familiar to him now, no longer a museum of wealth, but a place of warmth, of socks, left under couches and art projects drying on countertops. "They're talking about expanding the pilot," Rose said, handing him a draft of a proposal. 3 more sites, Compton, Boyle Heights, and Inglewood. Andre scanned the paper. "You're moving fast." "Because we have to," she said. "The window's open. People are paying attention, and I want to make sure we build something they can't ignore, even after the headlines change." Andre placed the paper down and looked at her, really looked. "What happens when the money slows? When the board gets nervous? When someone says this is too political?" Rose didn't blink. "Then we hold the line. We make it harder to say no, and if they still do, we find other doors, or we build our own damn house." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You were supposed to be a CEO, not a rebel." "Can't I be both?" she replied, a small smile pulling at her lips. He raised his glass of water. "To rebels with resources, and to kids who deserve more than survival," she added, tapping her glass against his. A few days later, the community center hosted a block party to celebrate the launch of the expanded pilot. Food trucks lined the street. A local jazz band played on the makeshift stage. People came, parents, teachers, curious neighbors. They laughed, danced, donated. The energy was electric. Lucas clung to Rose's side at first, overwhelmed by the crowd. But when he saw Mason handing out lemonade behind one of the booths, something shifted. He stepped forward, joined him, and began silently stacking cups. Mason didn't say a word, he just nudged Lucas's elbow in silent encouragement. That was all it took. Within an hour, they were laughing again, side by side, taking orders like seasoned pros. "They're a unit," Andre said, standing beside Rose. "Something rare, something sacred." Later, during a short speech, Rose stood on stage, microphone in hand. She didn't use a script. "I used to think impact meant numbers," she began. "Profits, projections, market share. And then my son stopped speaking, and I realized impact isn't just what you build, it's what you protect, who you listen to, and how you show up when no one's watching." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was sincere. That meant more. After the crowd thinned and the volunteers began packing up, Rose found Lucas sitting on the edge of the playground, a juice box in hand. "Tired?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded. "But happy," he said softly. She smiled, brushing his hair back. "I love you." "I know," he whispered. "You don't have to say it all the time." "I'll still say it anyway," she replied, "because sometimes love is in the repetition." That evening, back at the house, Rose sat alone in the living room with a photo album she hadn't opened in years. Pictures of her late husband, of Lucas as a baby, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Andre joined her a few minutes later, a mug of tea in his hand. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, pointing at one photo Lucas at age 3, laughing mid-spin in a pile of autumn leaves. That was the last time he laughed like that, until Mason. Andre looked at the photo. Grief takes from us in silence, and healing returns just as quietly. She closed the album. "I'm learning to listen better now." The night ended with Lucas falling asleep in Rose's bed, Mason snoring on a cot nearby. Andre and Rose sat in the hallway, backs against the wall, legs stretched out. "You ever think about what this would have looked like if we met 5 years earlier?" she asked. He tilted his head. "I think about what it means that we met now, when it matters most." She smiled, leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "Timing's funny that way." "It always is," he said, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by the sounds of sleeping children, of a house that had once echoed with silence and now pulsed with life, they both understood that this, whatever this was no longer temporary. It was a beginning, one worth fighting for, one worth protecting. "I heard your playground's turning heads downtown," said Martin Pierce, chairman of the Whitman board, as he swirled his coffee across the mahogany desk. Rose sat across from him, posture firm, eyes direct. She didn't wear power anymore the way she used to, with designer heels and rehearsed small talk. Now, she wore it like armor, quiet, intentional, unshakable. "It's not the playground, Martin," she replied. "It's the people in it." Martin smiled, thin and measured. "Still, you've made some noise. Community foundations, press, even the city council. Some of us are wondering, where does all this end? Hopefully," she said, without a beat. "With a model that works so well, no one dares defund it." "And what if someone tries?" he asked, voice laced with meaning. "Then they'll answer to more than just me." The meeting ended without handshakes, only understanding. Rose was no longer seeking permission. Back at the center that afternoon, Andre was leading a storytelling workshop. A dozen kids sat in a loose circle, sharing bits of their worlds, some funny, some raw. Mason had just finished a wild tale involving aliens and a stolen lunchbox. Lucas, sitting beside him, tapped his wrist, the sign he'd recently developed, to say he wanted to speak. The room quieted. He opened his mouth slowly, unsure, but the words came, barely above a whisper. "My favorite day was the day I met Mason, because he didn't need me to be fixed." The room was still. Then Mason grinned, stood up, and gave a dramatic bow. Laughter cracked the tension like thunder. Rose, watching from the doorway, wiped a tear. The rest of the week moved fast. Rose finalized the expansion sites, confirmed donor matches, and held late-night Zoom calls with city planners. The Whitman PR team pitched a press piece about the new initiative. "Just make sure it's about the kids," Rose instructed. "Not about me." But outside the center's bubble, shadows stirred. A memo had been circulating quietly among the Whitman investors' concerns about mission drift, questions about ROI, even whispers about Rose's personal relationship with Andre. One line stood out to her when it was leaked: "Whitman leadership must remain focused on growth, not grassroots." She read it in silence, then placed her phone face down. "We knew this might come," Andre said, standing in her kitchen, arms crossed. "It's not about us," she said. "It's about control. I've shifted the power dynamic, and they want it back. So what do? We get ahead of it." The next morning, Rose called a press conference, not a flashy affair, just a podium set up in front of the South Central Center, local news crews, families, kids. She stood beside Andre and Lucas, who held her hand without prompting. "This work isn't charity," she told the crowd. "It's justice, it's visibility, and it's sustainable because the people it's for are the ones helping build it." Reporters asked about her intentions, her role at Whitman, even her relationship with Andre. She didn't dodge. "Andre is a father, a leader, a partner in this mission. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then perhaps they should examine the walls they're hiding behind." The crowd applauded, loud and lasting. The following morning, the LA Times ran the headline: "CEO turns power into platform, Rose Whitman's mission to rebuild community from the ground up." Back at Whitman, emails flew. Emergency meetings were scheduled, but not all board members were in revolt. A few had grandkids with autism. Some had grown up on the very blocks Rose was now revitalizing. And a quiet shift began, one that Rose didn't force but welcomed. Meanwhile, the foundation kept growing. They launched weekend maker labs, hired local artists, partnered with food cooperatives. And one night, as Andre walked Rose to her car after a community dinner, he paused beneath the parking lot lights. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," he said, voice hesitant for the first time in weeks. "Yeah?" she said, turning to face him. "Do you think this is more than just a cause? You and me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, took his hand, and said, "I think it always was." "Oh." Inside the center, Lucas stood by the window, watching them. Mason joined him, holding 2 juice boxes. "Think they'll get married?" Mason asked. Lucas shrugged, but smiled. "Maybe. Adults are slow." "Facts," Mason said, handing him a juice. The 2 boys tapped their boxes together like a toast, then turned back to the table where a new friend waited, a girl with big glasses and a nervous smile. "Want to draw with us?" Lucas asked her, his voice light but sure. She nodded, eyes wide. As the lights dimmed and the center emptied, Rose looked around at the space she once saw as just a project. Now, it was a living thing, changing, expanding, healing. And for the first time since her husband died, She felt something settle in her chest. Not ambition, not strategy, but peace. Tomorrow would bring challenges, whispers, maybe even sabotage. But tonight, the air was full of color, sound, and the rhythm of belonging. And that, she thought, is more powerful than any boardroom in the city. It started with a voicemail. Rose returned from a site meeting in Boyle Heights to find a missed call from her executive assistant and a message that chilled her despite the California heat. "You should hear this before it goes public." She tapped play and leaned against the kitchen counter, already bracing herself. "Miss Whitman," the voice began, clipped and familiar, "the internal audit has uncovered irregularities regarding discretionary spending attached to the South Central Initiative. The board will be reviewing this matter formally. Please be advised your presence is required at Friday's emergency session." She paused the message halfway, eyes narrowing. It was Martin Pierce's voice, the same polished tone he used when toasting champagne, now turned surgical. Rose didn't panic. She called Andre. "I knew they'd come after something," he said, pacing in her backyard while Lucas and Mason played catch nearby. "It was never going to be about programs. It was going to be about you. They're weaponizing the funding, making it look like I've been misusing corporate resources." She exhaled slowly. "I documented everything. There's nothing illegal. But optics? They'll spin that in their sleep. So what do we do?" She stared out at the kids, Mason's laughter filling the space between the throw and the catch, Lucas's soft grin catching the sunlight. "We show up with truth. Not defense, not apology. Just truth." The next morning, she met with Maya Gonzalez, a civil rights attorney and one of the quiet champions of the initiative. They sat at a cafe in Echo Park, legal pads between them, lattes untouched. "They'll try to say your relationship with Andre influenced vendor decisions," Maya said, flipping through documents. "That your emotional investment clouded your fiscal responsibility. They can't prove that. They don't need to. They only need to suggest it loud enough." Rose didn't flinch. "Then let's make our voice louder." Maya looked at her, studying her for a beat. "You know this might cost you the company. Then maybe the company isn't worth what I thought it was." 8. Friday came quickly. The boardroom felt colder than usual, the windows slightly tinted from the morning glare. The usual water pitchers sat untouched. Martin stood at the head, posture crisp. "Miss Whitman," he began formally, "we're here to discuss concerns raised by the Finance Subcommittee." Rose stood alone, no legal team, no media handler, just a folder of documentation and a presence that had grown more grounded than ever. "I'm happy to walk you through every cent," she said calmly. "But first, I'd like to remind this board of why these programs exist." She then detailed how Lucas had gone from silence to speech, from isolation to connection, not through elite intervention, but because a single father saw him, met him where he was, and gave him the dignity of attention. Andre sat in the back row, his hands clasped, eyes locked on her. "This board has authorized millions for PR campaigns and product pivots," Rose continued. "But when asked to invest in the very communities that sustain our labor force, our city, our future, you hesitate. Why is that?" Martin leaned forward. "This isn't about philosophy, it's about governance." "No," she said. "It's about fear, fear of change, fear that if this model works, you'll have to admit we were building on the wrong foundation for decades." Murmurs swept the room. One member, Patricia Liu, raised her hand. "I visited the South Central site. I saw what those kids are learning. I met Lucas. I don't want to be the person who shuts that down because of optics." Another member nodded. The vote was split. In the end, Rose was not terminated, but her power was quietly reduced. Her discretionary control over Whitman funds was frozen pending a longer audit. She wasn't surprised. That night, she and Andre sat in her garage, sipping cold beers beside a shelf of old paint cans and dusty boxes. "So, you still CEO?" he asked. "Technically," she replied, "just one with clipped wings. And the mission? Still flying." She didn't slow down. If anything, the public ordeal made her work sharper. She used her personal wealth to form a separate foundation the Whitman Community Trust shielded from corporate interference. Donations poured in. Journalists began asking better questions. Families wrote letters, and kids from other cities reached out asking how they could get a center like Mason and Lucas's. Rose became a symbol not of scandal, but of integrity that didn't bend. Meanwhile, Lucas continued to grow. He spoke more now, in soft bursts, and even initiated a short conversation with his teacher. One night, he sat beside Rose and asked, "Will I ever forget what it was like before?" She paused, then said, "I hope not, because that silence made room for the strength you're finding now." The bond between the families deepened. Mason and Lucas were inseparable, and Andre and Rose navigated the new terrain between friendship and something more with unspoken grace. They never rushed. They simply stayed present. One day, Lucas brought home a hand-drawn card he'd made at school. It was a crude drawing of 4 stick figures standing under a tree. "That's you, me, Mason, and Andre," he explained proudly. "We're a team." Rose's throat tightened. "We are," she whispered. But beneath the joy, Rose remained vigilant. She knew Martin wouldn't quit. Power rarely did, and one evening as she left the center after locking up, she noticed a car idling near the alley, its windows tinted. It didn't move when she walked past. She noted the plates, memorized them. Eyes open, she reminded herself. Progress never came without resistance, but the difference now, she wasn't alone, and the movement wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the families, the children, the quiet revolutions happening every time someone chose to listen, to reach across fear and say, "I see you, I believe in you. Let's build something better, together." The email arrived at 3:42 a.m., a timestamp that, to Rose, said everything. Elliot Brennan didn't sleep unless he was plotting. The subject line read, "Board action required, emergency governance session." She didn't open it right away. She stared at the glow of her phone, then at the shadows stretching across her ceiling, and finally at Lucas, asleep beside her after a night of nightmares. His small hand clutched hers like an anchor. At 7:30, her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Laura Yates, the COO. Short, sterile, and unmistakably final. "They're calling for a vote. Full removal. Be ready." Rose stood quietly, brushing the hair from Lucas's forehead. She whispered, "They're not coming for me, sweetheart. They're coming for what we're building." By the time she walked into Whitman headquarters, she had already handed over temporary operational control of the community trust to Maya. She knew this wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be a dismantling. The boardroom was already filled. Martin stood at the front, hands steepled, flanked by Elliot and Laura. Patricia Liu offered a tight smile, but her face looked pale, strained. Martin began without preamble. "We've convened this session under Article 7.3 for the immediate consideration of leadership realignment." "You mean a coup?" Rose said calmly, placing her portfolio on the table. "Let's not dress it up." Elliot adjusted his tie. "Rose, your initiatives have become a distraction. Donors are nervous. Shareholders have questions. This isn't personal." "Of course it is," she said. "It's always personal when a woman pushes too far, and doubly so when she pushes with someone who doesn't look like you." Laura's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Martin cleared his throat. "You were warned. We asked you to keep Whitman on mission. But instead, you've become a symbol. That's not what we fund." "No," Rose said. "You fund comfort, control, tax write-offs, dressed as philanthropy. But community? Real, complicated, noisy, human progress? That makes you nervous." The vote proceeded, 10 in favor of her removal, 4 abstentions. 2 Patricia and a younger board member named Caleb voted against. It was over. "Effective immediately," Martin said. "You are relieved of your duties as CEO of the Whitman Foundation." Rose stood. "No tears, no outrage, only clarity." "Then I'll leave you with this," she said, voice calm but firm. "Power that fears change doesn't deserve to keep it. And movements don't end when leaders step down. They grow roots." She walked out without looking back. The story broke within the hour. Headlines ranged from "Whitman ousts CEO in power struggle" to "Philanthropy's future faces reckoning." Within 12 hours, local stations aired interviews with parents and teachers from the South Central Center. Andre's voice cracked as he spoke to a reporter outside the gates. "She didn't just fund a program. She believed in us before we even believed in ourselves." At home, Rose sat at her kitchen table surrounded by silence. Lucas approached with a drawing. 4 figures again, this time standing on top of a mountain. He pointed. "That's you. You climbed." She smiled. "And what's next?" "Now we build," he whispered. The next days moved like a storm. Support flooded in from community organizers, education leaders, even small-town mayors who'd modeled their own centers after hers. But with support came backlash. Conservative outlets spun the story into a cautionary tale of woke overreach and fiscal irresponsibility. Rose received threats. Maya hired security. Lucas was moved to a new school. Then one morning, Andre found a note taped to the center door. "Your kind doesn't belong here." The kids didn't see it, Andre made sure of that, but the staff did. They held a circle that day, lighting candles and letting every person speak their fear, their hope, their exhaustion. "We keep going," Andre told them. "Not because it's safe, but because it matters." Rose didn't retreat. Instead, she leaned in. She gave interviews. She published op-eds. She showed up to every planning meeting, now as a private citizen. "They can take titles," she said during a podcast appearance, "but they can't take the work. We've already changed too much to go back." Andre became more visible, too reluctantly at first, but steadily. He was invited to speak at UCLA, where he told Lucas's story without naming him. "Silence isn't weakness," he said. "Sometimes it's the world failing to listen." Afterward, a mother in the audience stood and said, "My son hasn't spoken in 3 years, but tonight, he nodded when I asked if he wanted to come here again." Andre had no words, only tears. That night, Rose and Andre sat side by side on her porch. The city hummed around them, the kind of lull that made space for quiet truths. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I'm here." He reached for her hand. "That's enough." A week later, Lucas stood in front of his new class to give a short presentation. He held up his drawing, the mountain, the 4 figures, and said clearly, "This is about not giving up, even when they try to break you." His teacher wept quietly in the back row, and still, the tension climbed. Martin and Elliot began a new PR campaign to erase Rose's narrative. They funded a slick ad blitz, introduced a rebrand, and announced a new CEO, someone young, safe, and loyal. But the community didn't forget. One by one, families withdrew their support from the old Whitman. They turned instead to the trust, to Rose, to Andre. The momentum shifted, not with fireworks, but with quiet choices. A mother bringing her child to the new center, a teacher volunteering on weekends, a boy like Lucas raising his hand in class. Resistance turned into resilience, and resilience turned into revolution, not of anger, but of consistency. Day after day, people chose compassion over convenience. And Rose? She stood among them, not above, not behind, but beside, knowing that justice, real justice, was not a courtroom or a headline. It was a boy learning to speak, a man standing up despite fear, and a woman who refused to be silent. The invitation came folded in cream cardstock, sealed with the new Whitman Foundation logo, a gold phoenix that felt ironic, considering the ashes they'd created. It was addressed to Rose, formal and impersonal. "You are cordially invited to the 75th anniversary gala, honoring Whitman's legacy and future vision." Rose read it twice. She didn't need to. She knew the subtext. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a PR maneuver. They wanted her there, visibly excluded from the podium, but present enough to avoid the criticism of erasure. She placed it on the kitchen counter without a word. That evening, Andre found her in the garden, pruning her lemon tree. "So," he said, leaning on the post near the gate, "they want to dress you up as their relic." She snipped a dead branch. "They want to neutralize me, appear inclusive while reinforcing the new order. You going?" "I haven't decided." He studied her a moment, then said, "Let them see you shine, not as a ghost of what they lost, but as the fire they couldn't put out." She looked at him, then back at the lemons. "Then I'll need a dress that says, 'I'm not done.'" Andre grinned. "I know a seamstress in Leimert Park. She works magic." On the night of the gala, the ballroom at the Biltmore was ablaze with chandeliers, soft jazz, and curated elegance. Waiters in black carried trays of canapés no one ate. Rose arrived alone, in a navy gown that caught the light like water and eyes like fire. Conversations paused as she entered, then resumed with forced casualness. Some nodded politely, others looked away. Martin was near the stage, flanked by Elliot and the new CEO, a woman named Celeste with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, the martyr arrives," Elliot muttered under his breath. "Or the mirror," Martin replied. "Let's just hope she behaves." Rose didn't approach them. She made her way to a table near the back, where Patricia Liu sat with Caleb and a few new faces, young professionals of color, who whispered her name with reverence. "We're glad you came," Patricia said quietly. "Your presence reminds them they don't own the story." "No one does," Rose replied, "but we can shape it." The program began. Speeches rolled out like ribbon, polished, performative, and strategically hollow. Celeste thanked trailblazers of the past without naming any. Martin spoke of renewed purpose. Elliot announced a new digital platform for youth engagement, which everyone in the room knew would be outsourced and impersonal. Then, with practiced poise, they unveiled a promotional video. Footage of past initiatives played across a massive screen, children laughing, communities gathering, mentors teaching. And there, clear as day, was a clip of Lucas at the old South Central site, smiling as he painted a mural beside Mason. A soft gasp moved through the room. Rose's jaw clenched. They hadn't asked permission. They hadn't acknowledged his journey. They were using him. The lights came up. The room applauded, but Rose stayed still. Later, as guests mingled and champagne flowed, she found her way to Celeste. "That footage," Rose said evenly, "was used without my consent." Celeste smiled, sharp and polite. "The footage belongs to the foundation, Rose. The story doesn't." Elliot stepped in, too close. "Let's not make a scene. Tonight is about unity." "Unity built on theft is a costume," Rose replied. "It always unravels." Martin approached then, his tone patronizing. "We honored your work tonight, Rose. You should take pride in that." She looked at him, calm, but unflinching. "Pride isn't yours to offer, and legacy isn't yours to curate." The table nearest them fell silent. One of the young professionals stared, wide-eyed. Rose turned to leave. But before she did, she said, loud enough for those around to hear, "The future doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the quiet ones we chose to hear. And you stopped listening long ago." And the next morning, clips from the gala went viral, not the speeches, not the staged video, but someone's shaky phone footage of Rose confronting the leadership. The internet did what it does best. It turned whispers into roars. Articles followed, opinion pieces, interviews. One headline read, "The woman who refused to vanish." But Rose didn't gloat. She returned to work. At the Trust, things were expanding. A second center broke ground in Compton. Andre was leading a fatherhood mentorship program. Lucas, now thriving, was helping other nonverbal kids find alternative ways to communicate art, rhythm, movement. One boy, Marcus, hadn't spoken in years, but with Lucas's help, he learned to tap a rhythm that meant, "I feel safe." It became a small miracle. One afternoon, while sorting supplies, Rose found a box of old letters, thank yous from families, progress reports from the early days. One note, written in crayon, simply read, "You made my mom smile again." She held it in her hands and wept not from sadness, but from the weight of knowing that joy, real joy, had become rebellion in a world built to resist it. Later that evening, she sat with Andre on the center's rooftop. The city stretched out before them, messy and magnificent. "You remember what I said when they ousted me?" she asked. "That movements grow roots?" He nodded. "Well," she said, "I think we're sprouting branches now." He smiled, then pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "Lucas asked me to give you this." She opened it. Inside was a drawing. Her, standing tall, arms outstretched, roots beneath her feet, branches reaching to the sky. Above it, Lucas had written, in careful print, "Thank you for hearing me." She closed her eyes, breathed in the cool night air, and knew with absolute certainty that no board, no backlash, no branding could touch what they'd grown. Because some things, once planted in truth, don't die. They bloom, quietly, powerfully, permanently. The morning air was heavy with summer heat, yet the sidewalks of Crenshaw bustled with energy. It was the first day of the Whitman South Community Festival, an event that once belonged to the original foundation, but had now been reimagined by the people it was meant to serve. Rose arrived just after sunrise. Volunteers were setting up booths, teens painting welcome signs, and elders arranging folding chairs near the performance stage. She moved among them with ease, exchanging hugs, giving directions, and offering coffee where it was most needed. No cameras, no press, just community. Andre arrived a little later with Lucas, who wore a t-shirt he'd designed himself, a heart wrapped in vines with the words, "Roots speak loudest." Rose smiled when she saw it. "That's perfect," she said, ruffling his hair. Lucas signed something quickly. "You helped me grow it," and she blinked back the sudden warmth behind her eyes. By mid-morning the crowd swelled. Families filled the space, kids darted between games, and a jazz trio from Baldwin Hills played familiar tunes that got the elders dancing. Andre stood at the grill with Mason, flipping burgers and laughing like they had built the place from their own laughter. The energy was alive, real, and defiantly joyful. At one of the craft tables, a local teacher named Miss Ortiz guided children through an art project. "We're making community flags," she explained to a group of parents nearby. "Each one tells your story." It was the kind of space Rose had always dreamed of, where dignity wasn't distributed, it was expected. But not everyone present was here to celebrate. Standing just outside the festival boundaries, Martin watched from behind the tinted window of his car. He'd received the reports. The Trust's programs had tripled in attendance. Local businesses were now sponsoring events. The City Council had begun redirecting grants toward Rose's initiatives. Whitman, rebranded and remodeled, was bleeding relevance. He sipped his coffee with a bitter edge. "They think they've won," he muttered. Elliot, seated beside him, didn't reply. He just stared at the laughter spilling into the streets. "You can't stop momentum like this," he said after a moment. "It's too organic now," Martin scoffed. "Then we remind them who owns the narrative." He picked up his phone and dialed. "Set the interview. I'll speak to the Times. It's time we retake the moral high ground." That evening, Martin's article hit digital shelves. He framed the original foundation as misunderstood visionaries, accused Rose of personal ambition, and painted the Trust as a splintered movement with no accountability. It was tactful, coded, and dangerous. Rose read the piece twice. Andre read it once, then paced the kitchen for 20 minutes. "We should respond," he said. "Tell our truth." But Rose shook her head. "Let's not react. Let's reveal." 2 days later, without fanfare, the Trust released a short documentary on their website, 20 minutes of stories told directly by the people served. No commentary, no rebuttals, just voices. A grandmother explaining how the after-school program helped her return to work. A teenager describing how learning to weld gave him purpose. A young mother saying, "They saw me when no one else did." It wasn't flashy, it was raw, and it struck harder than any headline. Within hours, it was shared by local outlets, then picked up nationally. The tide shifted again, not toward outrage, but toward recognition, toward truth. Meanwhile, something else stirred beneath the surface. A woman named Janice Coleman, a former Whitman accountant, contacted Patricia Liu confidentially. "I think you should see this," she said. What followed was a series of financial statements, internal emails, and flagged discrepancies, years of them. Misused funds, phantom vendors, bonuses rerouted through shell nonprofits. Patricia brought the evidence to Rose and Andre. "It's bigger than we thought," she said. "This isn't just reputation laundering, it's theft." Rose stared at the printouts. "We'll need to be careful," she said. "This could hurt a lot of people, including the ones still inside who didn't know." Andre leaned over the files. "Then we expose the rot, but protect the roots." They formed a small task force: lawyers, former employees, community leaders. The goal wasn't vengeance, it was integrity. Lucas, unaware of the storm rising, spent his afternoons at the center mentoring Marcus and a few other kids. One day, as they practiced drumming patterns, Marcus turned to him and signed, "Why don't the people in charge want us to speak?" Lucas paused, considering, then slowly signed back, "Because when we do, they can't ignore us anymore." Marcus stared for a long moment, then nodded and kept playing. That evening, Rose sat with Lucas under the orange glow porch light. He leaned against her shoulder, holding his sketch pad. "Do you think they'll ever stop trying to break what we build?" he asked. "They'll try," she said, "but they won't succeed, because we don't build alone." He flipped to a new page and began to draw. "Then I'll keep making new maps," he said. She smiled. "And I'll keep walking beside you." Just before midnight, her phone buzzed. It was Maya. "We've got the final report," she said, "and enough corroboration to take this public." Rose didn't answer right away. She looked out at the street, at the quiet buildings lit by memory and resilience. "Then we move forward," she said. but on our terms, with truth, with care, and without flinching. A storm was coming, real, loud, and undeniable. But Rose had never feared storms. She knew they revealed the strongest roots. The press conference was set for noon at the Central Library's community hall. The choice was intentional, neutral ground, open access, and symbolic. Knowledge lived here. Truth had always belonged here. Rose arrived early, walking past rows of folding chairs, noting the mix of community members, journalists, and foundation representatives already gathering. She wasn't dressed in power this time, no heels, no makeup armor, just a tailored navy blazer and the quiet conviction of someone who had nothing left to prove. Andre stood beside her, notes in hand but barely glancing at them. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "We're not here to destroy, we're here to reveal." He exhaled and gave a tight smile. "Then let's make sure the truth echoes louder than their denial." At 12 sharp, the room settled. Rose stepped to the podium. No teleprompter, no script, just her voice. "Good afternoon. I'm here today not as a whistleblower, not as a former executive, but as a mother, a community advocate, and someone who believes that truth has the power to heal, even when it hurts." She paused, letting her words land. "What we are about to share is not easy. It exposes a pattern of financial misconduct, misrepresentation, and systemic manipulation within the upper ranks of the original Whitman Foundation. But this isn't about revenge, it's about accountability and rebuilding trust from the ground up." Patricia followed, presenting a clear, documented timeline of the corruption. She didn't name names recklessly. She didn't dramatize. She simply connected the dots. Grants redirected into 4 profit shell entities. Board members voting on their own bonuses. Inflated reports to maintain public funding. Then Janice Coleman, her voice shaking but steady, shared her story how she'd tried to raise concerns internally and been silenced. She ended with a simple truth. "I stayed silent because I was afraid. I speak now because silence is how injustice survives." The questions from the press came fast, some sharp, some sympathetic. "Are you planning legal action? Will the current board be dissolved? What does this mean for the communities served?" Rose answered each one with precision and grace. "Our focus is restitution and restoration, not theatrics. We've submitted our findings to state regulators. Our goal is not to dismantle but to return what was stolen and protect what matters." The conference ended not with applause but with a kind of stunned respect. Truth had not arrived on a war horse. It had walked in, quietly, and refused to leave. By evening, headlines blazed across every major outlet. "Whistleblower exposes corruption in Legacy Foundation. From betrayal to rebirth, the quiet revolution at Whitman." But it was a quote from Lucas that resonated most. In a short interview with a local news station, he'd written on a card, "We didn't fight to win. We fought so others wouldn't have to." That line was reposted more than 1,000,000 times within 24 hours. The fallout was swift. Martin resigned from the board within 3 days, citing health reasons. Elliot disappeared from public view. Celeste issued a carefully worded statement distancing herself from past practices. But no one was listening to them anymore. The narrative had shifted permanently, and not because of scandal, but because of sustained integrity. The Whitman Trust, now fully independent, opened 2 new centers, one in Richmond and another in East LA. The model was simple: listen first, act second. Hire locally, lead collectively. The funding was lean but growing because people trusted where their money was going. In the months that followed, Rose returned to teaching part-time at a nearby college. Not theory but lived experience. Her class was called Communities in Motion, Building Beyond the Blueprint. Students lined the hallway to enroll. One evening after class, as she packed up her notes, a student lingered behind. "I just wanted to say, my brother found a place at your South Center last year. He's talking now. Not much, but enough to tell us he's okay. Thank you." Rose smiled, softened. "Tell him to keep talking. We'll keep listening." At home, life moved gently. Lucas, now entering high school, had become an artist with growing local recognition. His mural painted across the back wall of the trust depicted hands reaching toward one another from different directions, meeting in the center to cradle a small sapling. Below it, his words, "We protect what we grow together." Andre continued his work with young fathers, running workshops and sometimes just hosting barbecues where men could cry without shame. The house was often full of noise now, joyful, chaotic, real, a life rebuilt, not in opposition, but in truth. One afternoon, as summer bled into fall, Rose sat on the front steps with a cup of tea. The mailman handed her an envelope, no return address. Inside was a short note. "You were never supposed to win, but you did. Jay." She read it twice, folded it carefully, then tossed it into the fire pit without a word. Lucas stepped outside, sitting beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him, at the boy who once couldn't speak and now stood with such calm clarity. "I am," she said, "more than ever." The past hadn't disappeared. The scars remained. But they were no longer the story. They were the proof that against silence, truth could rise, that against power, community could prevail, and that some roots, when nurtured with courage, grew into forests no fire could consume. The story of Rose, Andre, and Lucas reminds us that true change begins when ordinary people choose integrity over convenience. In a world where corruption often hides behind polished reputations, their journey teaches us that accountability, when paired with compassion, can rebuild what was broken. It is not power or status that shapes a legacy, but the quiet courage to stand for truth, even when it costs everything.